Welcome to Nasdaq Trade Talks. I'm your host, Jill Malandrino, global markets reporter at Nasdaq. Joining me at MarketSite, we have Jeff Menke. He's with Nasdaq's IR intelligence team. We're going to give an overview of the TMT sector as well as take a look at Bitcoin. How can that potentially impact the semiconductor space? And before we get into our favorite topic, Bitcoin, Jeff, it's great to have you with us on set, but let's get a review over how TMT has performed, and it seems to be that it's largely macro-based.
It is, and what we've seen, I think, mostly from what we saw in Q4 was just really oversold conditions. That's really kind of led to a sort of a broad market bounce. We've seen a lot of economic data that's been coming in over the last week or so, or last couple of weeks, that has really kind of driven the markets a little bit higher. And I think one thing that investors really haven't been able to price in is a more flexible Federal Reserve. So we've actually saw about 4 rate hikes during 2018, and there was plans for 2 more rate hikes in 2019. But since that has been scaled back a little bit, it's something that I don't think the investors have really kind of been able to price in, which kind of has drawn a little bit more of attention to the equity markets.
Right. Well, I mean, of course, today, on Friday, we have President Trump saying that he wants to see more rate cuts and a softer Fed. So I'm sure it's going to bode well, not just for the TMT space, but the market overall.
Exactly. There's been a higher probability now for a rate hike, or possibly a rate hike in the near future. So it'll be interesting to see how that fares out.
All right. Well, let's talk about M&A within the space because it was on fire for 2018. Do you think that we'll continue to see more consolidation?
Yeah, it's interesting because we saw a number of mega deals. For example, we had IBM acquire Red Hat back in October, and we also saw a lot of consolidation that's kind of continuing within the media space, especially with Disney acquiring 21st Century Fox, and the ongoing situation with T-Mobile and Sprint that's going through regulatory reviews, I guess. But what we usually see is a kind of a drawdown in M&A activity, just given the market uncertainty. So we did see a pretty significant drop in the equity markets in Q4. And we also saw, the government shutdown that happened through, the longest one in January. And just given the, general trade talks, that kind of really, I think, just put the M&A activity on hold. So I think that's going to be a really big focus now, especially since going forward, we actually did see a pretty big deal with NVIDIA acquiring Mellanox in early March. So I think that's going to be a pretty interesting ripe opportunity, just given some of the valuations that we've been seeing across the space, especially given the rebound in the markets over the last quarter.
All right, let's wrap up here with the chart that we see on the wall. And I mean, look at this performance in Bitcoin from the beginning of April to where we are today. That is quite a move, and you think that this could potentially be a positive for the semiconductor space. Why is that?
Right. So actually, if we see this chart, we actually see it's kind of been consolidating really since the end of the year. And I actually really wasn't even going to be talking about Bitcoin up until this week, but we kind of did see a pretty significant spike on Tuesday at least, and that was due to reports about a $100 million investment that kind of really spiked the Bitcoin price back up to around 5,000 is last time where I checked. And you have been seeing these reports about kind of smart money entering the space. There are reports about like Jack Dorsey buying Bitcoin at $10,000 clips every day. And the fact that we did see a pretty big spike in Bitcoin is going to be pretty interesting, because what we saw last year was that a lot of investors were pricing in an increase in orders for mining chips. And what we saw at least in the latter half of 2018 is that really didn't kind of meet expectations, and that caused a lot of semiconductors to lose 30, 40, even 50% of their value. So the fact that maybe Bitcoin could be spiking a little bit, maybe that's going to regenerate some interest in the space, and really for mining chips in general.
All right, Jeff, thank you so much for joining us at MarketSite. And thank you for joining me for Sector Talks. I am Jill Malandrino.